300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a Wednesday morning. Apologies starting off a couple minutes past my intended start time, but nonetheless, have a great show planned for you today. Even a special segment. The Washington football team is planning to unveil a new nickname. I'm going to reveal what those final 8 are, and I'm even going to offer some of my own suggestions on the matter. Some news in the tennis world I'm going to touch on, but I have to start off first with something that's actually really interesting from the NBA. So I wasn't planning on discussing this to start the show, but Desmond Bane, the teammate of Memphis Grizzlies star Ja Morant, made some interesting comments yesterday that sparked some headlines. And he was arguing on behalf of his teammate that Ja Morant should be in the conversation for the best point guard in the NBA today. And it made me think about where Ja Morant currently stands amongst the NBA's best point guards right now. Now, obviously, this comes on the heels of another game-winning performance by Ja Morant in which he downed the Cavs just last night. Another great performance by him. He shut out the Brooklyn Nets on the road, 118-104. He dropped 36, 6, and 8 in that performance on 14 of 22 shooting. That was against Kevin Durant and James Harden. Obviously, he beat LeBron at home, scoring 40 last week. Beat the Warriors and the Jazz on the road with huge performances. So all of these comments are coming after a significant amount of data and evidence would point to a fantastic season for Ja Morant, because most of the conversation was revolving around him as far as being a first-time All-Star, when his teammate wanted to shift the question not just to being an All-Star, but how does he fit and compare throughout the NBA as far as the best point guard in the league. So obviously, this is not going to be a career achievement award, this list. This isn't simply about who's had a better career, because that's more of a longevity and a sustained level of greatness type of recognition. So if we're honestly being objective and fair about this, this conversation is actually a lot more interesting and intriguing than you might think. Because when you really think, first of all, Ja Morant, the fact that he was drafted in the NBA just 3 years ago, the guy that he is forever linked to is Zion. Zion Williamson is this freak athlete, Skywalker, who everyone was salivating over to draft. But the question surrounding those two was always, well, which player would be the more prudent draft selection? Because on the one hand, you've got Zion, who's a tremendous freak athlete, who's got an incredible motor. And you've got a guy in Ja Morant who, and by the way, Zion Williamson is 6'6", 6'7", versus a guy in Ja Morant who's a little bit smaller, a point guard, possesses incredible athleticism. But again, Zion was kind of the more coveted of the two. And yet when you look at their careers, one, unfortunately, has been slightly tarnished because of his inability to maintain his weight. Zion has struggled to stay healthy. He hasn't played at all this year. And you've got a guy in Ja Morant who's been the epitome of reliable, durable, and available. And available is the most important ability in any sport. And so I decided to take a look at and compare Ja Morant to all the best point guards in the league right now. And this is actually a really interesting conversation to have because it's not as far-fetched as you might think. So let's start with the point guards who unquestionably Ja Morant is not better than. He's not better than Steph Curry. The Golden State Warriors point guard is undoubtedly the best point guard in the league, best shooter that we've ever seen. And so no one is going to put Ja Morant, including myself, over Steph Curry. That is really the only universal choice right now. As far as when you look at guys that are playing in the NBA today, this particular year, this season, that are better than Ja Morant. Steph Curry's it. Chris Paul, I would probably narrowly edge Chris Paul over Ja Morant just because of the leadership and the invaluable aspect that he brings to the game. We've seen how valuable he's been to the Phoenix Suns the last couple of years. We saw what he did in OKC. We've seen him be a winner every single place he goes. And even though his stats aren't the same as Ja Morant, who, by the way, is averaging 25 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, 49% from the floor, 40% from the three-point line is Ja Morant this year, 10 plus games of 30 or more points. So he's been sensational. He's a better scorer right now at this stage of his career than Chris Paul, but that's mainly because Chris Paul chooses not to be a scorer all the time. He's averaging over 10 assists per game. He's a floor general. He's the orchestrator. He's the engineer behind this Phoenix Suns offense, and he can still sit in the chair and play good defense. So that one's a close one. I'd probably give Chris Paul a little bit of an edge. The other kind of close one for me is Trae Young, because Trae Young's having a fantastic individual season, 29 points or 28 points, 4 rebounds, 9 assists. So as a scorer, Trae Young is a little bit better. But when you look at Ja Morant, there's just some intangible that he has. It's a leadership. It's an ability to galvanize and to inspire and get the best out of his teammates. That is a little bit more prominent. I think it's a toss-up between those two, but I might give a slight edge to Ja Morant there. So right now, we only have Steph Curry and Chris Paul ahead of Ja Morant. Damien Lillard, listen, overall for his career, Damien Lillard is a better point guard. But when you look at this individual season in a vacuum, Ja Morant's having the better year. Lillard is 24 points, 4 rebounds, 7 assists, but his efficiency is way down. It's plummeted to 40% from the floor, 32.5% from the three-point line. That's kind of a subpar standard. That's subpar for a guy in Damian Lillard who is an all-star, who's a bona fide superstar. So when you look at, again, no one's going to say that Ja Morant is better for his career than Damian Lillard. And if you were to do a mock draft, people would take Damian Lillard over Ja Morant. But as far as who is having the better individual year this year, the Blazers are tied for 11th in the Western Conference. Grizzlies are 4th right now. They've won 6 straight games. So I'd probably have to lean towards Ja Morant. So now comes the question of, okay, what about hybrids? Guys like Luka, LeBron, James Harden. Well, for Luka, I think Luka's a better player overall than Ja Morant just because of his complete offensive repertoire. But for the purposes of this conversation, I don't really consider Luka a point guard. Same thing with LeBron. Same thing with James Harden. Although even James Harden, you can make an argument that Ja is having a better year, better season than James Harden. So now it comes to some of the other point guards in the league. Russell Westbrook. Yeah, Ja Morant has been more consistent, much more efficient, doesn't turn the ball over nearly as much. Russell Westbrook's been really careless, even though, to his credit, last night against the Sacramento Kings, he committed 0 turnovers for the first time since 2016. But prior to that, he'd been just a walking turnover everywhere he goes, and he's been less efficient. Ja Morant is shooting the three-point shot a lot better at a much higher clip. Same thing with the free throw line. So I would take Ja Morant over Westbrook, who, again, it's only right now. Westbrook is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. So if you look at career, no one's comparing the two's careers. Westbrook has a much more robust and extensive career achievement than Ja Morant. But this year, right now, I'm going with Ja. So then it comes to, okay, some other options, a couple others that people probably would forget about. Kyrie Irving, as great as Kyrie Irving is, he hasn't played yet this season. So as far as who's been better this year, well, Ja Morant has been better just because Kyrie Irving hasn't played. So I would take Ja Morant in this instance. Jamal Murray hasn't played a game yet for the Denver Nuggets this year. He's rehabbing a torn ACL. So I take Ja Morant. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a nice, promising young player for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I like his makeup. He's fearless. He's unafraid to take the big shots. I saw it firsthand when I went to the Lakers OKC game. He downed us in the fourth quarter. But I still like Ja Morant over Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's just a personal opinion. And same thing with De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox, I love his competitiveness. I love his motor. But right now, I think Ja Morant is a better player than De'Aaron Fox. There are also questions with regard to De'Aaron Fox about whether or not he's truly a franchise player. I think the jury is still out on that. He's not consistent enough where it's a sure bet that he's going to lead a franchise to a title. Some nights he looks like a superstar. Other nights he just looks kind of like above average player. And that's not the case for Ja Morant. And then finally, the last player that I make the comparison to is Lamelo Ball. And I love Lamelo Ball. Absolutely love Lamelo Ball. But right now, I'd give the edge to Ja Morant because he's more assertive offensively. Lamelo Ball is still maturing and is still growing into that offensive mindset of wanting and trying to take over games. We haven't seen him do it just yet, or at least enough. Ja Morant's kind of flipped the switch where he's recognizing, okay, down the stretch of games, it's my time to bring us home. Lamelo Ball is still figuring that out, still navigating that balance of wanting to compliment his teammates, but at the same time also take over late when it's time. Ja Morant, he's unequivocally the guy that they go to down the stretch. He's going to get the job done. And he's one of the top players in the NBA as far as kind of game winners, go-ahead baskets this year. He's been that clutch. So, again, overall, I don't think he's the best point guard in the NBA right now. But if you're being fair and objective about it, there's a legitimate argument to be made that he's the second best point guard, maybe the third best point guard in the game right now that's playing right now this year. There's a strong argument to be made, and I just thought that the conversation is actually a lot more less far-fetched, less fanciful than maybe you would otherwise think. If you really take a deep dive, which is what I did, it's actually quite interesting. Quite interesting. Okay, so I mentioned Kyrie Irving, that the fact that he hadn't played yet this year as part of the reason why I would take Ja Morant over him this season. But apparently Kyrie Irving is set to make his return and make his season debut tonight at the Indiana Pacers. He obviously was prohibited from returning to the team all throughout the offseason because he refused to get vaccinated. That was a position that the coaching staff, the players, the owners, Joe Tsai and Clara Tsai, his wife, had stated. So Kyrie Irving had to stay away from the team, wasn't allowed to practice or play with them for the first 2-3 months of the year. So obviously, that stance has softened and has changed. And it's only fitting and really unsurprisingly that 2 weeks ago when he was cleared to return to the team, he immediately entered health and safety protocols for the NBA, which forced him to isolate for 10 days. So that was a big shocker to all of us. But here's the interesting thing. And when I think about Kyrie Irving's impact, you have to look at it from two different lenses. The first is the business lens, the second is the basketball lens. So, from Joe Tsai and Clara Tsai's perspective, they're on the clock. Their championship window is fading, and it's fading fast. We're starting to see that the shelf life of this orange, the shelf life of this team is not that long. The way that we see championship windows collapse and fold up, these things are transient. They're ephemeral. When you have an opportunity to win a championship, you have to go in all in right now. And that's what these owners, that's what Joe Tsai is saying is, you know what? Screw with my ethical and moral compass. We're trying to win. And Kyrie Irving gives us the best chance to win. Flat out gives us the best chance to win. And when you look at the NBA landscape and some of the top teams in both conferences, whether it's the Eastern Conference with the Chicago Bulls and DeMar DeRozan and the tear that he's been on, whether it's the Milwaukee Bucks, who when they've had their big three healthy and playing, they're nearly unstoppable. The Miami Heat are a big threat. And then you just look across the pond to the Western Conference. Phoenix Suns and Golden State Warriors are on another level. The Brooklyn Nets are saying to themselves, hey, we actually need Kyrie Irving to actually win a championship this year. That's the reality, because James Harden hasn't looked like his superstar self for the majority of the season. He has simply kind of reverted back to being an all-star. But really, it's been KD or bust. And the irony is COVID is what raged through and kind of decimated this team. And now, because of COVID, the one guy that refused to get vaccinated was called back up to the forefront, was called up to the front lines. And what's extremely disappointing about this for me, again, from a business perspective, I understand it's about the bottom line. Kyrie Irving's going to make you more money. Kyrie Irving is an artist with the basketball. He's an exceptional talent. Arguably the best handle of all time, the best below the rim finisher of all time. He can do everything offensively, opens up the floor, creates more shooting lanes, creates more opportunities, and playing All right. Sorry, we're back on. Apologies for that momentary delay. Appreciate you sticking with me on Morning Joe right here on JJ Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube Mondays and Wednesday mornings, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. So this was an interesting story. Yesterday, the Washington football team announced its plans to unveil a new nickname on February 2nd, which obviously is coinciding with the Super Bowl right along that time. And they've been playing without an official mascot, without an official nickname for the past 2 full seasons. So they've just been called the Washington football team, and they were the first of 4 major North American team sports to eradicate any kind of derogatory insinuations and images about Native Americans. So we saw Washington football team, they erased all of that. They got rid of and eradicated that name. We saw the Cleveland, they used to be the formerly known as the Cleveland Indians, underwent the same type of change. Now they're called the Cleveland Guardians. That was a change that they did in the MLB. So right now, these were the final 8 candidates that were known, that we know of, as far as that the Washington football team is considering. This is their final 8 list. So we've got Armada, Presidents, Brigade, Red Hogs, Commanders, Red Wolves, Defenders, and the football team. So let me first just comment on the options that they already have. So personally, I'm not a big fan of the singular plural types of mascots like the Stanford Cardinal. I prefer going with options that are more fluid, that are a little bit more action packed, that you can have a legitimate mascot. An Armada is kind of a military unit. I'm not exactly sure if that's the choice that I would get. It doesn't roll off the tongue for me. Presidents is good. I like Presidents. The question is, which president are you going to pick to be the mascot? I think that who your mascot is and how you can brand it is extremely important, is a critical piece. So Presidents is okay. Brigade is the same thing. It's just a subdivision unit in an army. I'm not really sure which brigade. Who are you going with? What's the mascot? I need visuals. I need images. I'm not sure if this could work. Red Hogs, here's the problem. You still preserve the name Red, and that's the insinuation to the former mascot that you had. So Hogs isn't bad, because wild boars are aggressive livestock. However, a red hog, we already have the pound in Cleveland. So if you can come out maybe with wild hog, maybe that would work. Red hog, again, I think the insinuation with red still dates back to their former mascot. And that's the same problem that I have with the Red Wolves. Is, first of all, there's some trademark and copyright problems and issues with that one, but you still preserve the name Red in there. I just don't think that would be appropriate again when you moved off of your former Redskins. I think it's just as derogatory. I don't think that one works. Commanders is fine. It's original. Does it get my juices going? No. Does it make me want to sprint over to whatever their stadium is going to be called by the next official sponsor? Not really. It works. Same thing with Presidents, who I like. I like the Presidents more. Commanders, not really. The Defenders, I think that's just really vague. I don't think that's that creative at all. And you can't go back to being called the Washington football team. So I decided to incur this additional encumbrance and come up with my own suggestions, because I think that I can perhaps inspire the Washington football organization into thinking about some other options. So here are my options for the new mascot for the Washington football team. So the first one is the Washington football team woodchucks. So hear me out here. The woodchucks are actually the state bird of the District of Columbia. They are relentless. And when you think about woodchucks and the fact that they're almost like groundhogs, which is kind of the connection to hogs in a way, this actually perfectly fits because what you want as an organization, you want a name that's going to stick. You want a name that's easy to remember. Woodchucks, you're not going to forget the Woodchucks. The Washington football team, the Washington Woodchucks, it's in alliteration. You got W on W. And when you think about the characteristics of a woodchuck, it makes perfect sense because woodchucks are known for burrowing in the winter to hibernate. Well, Dan Snyder and the organization, they burrow away from controversy. They burrow away from conflict. And it makes all the sense in the world to me. Not to mention they have a propensity for destructive behavior. Well, I don't think we've seen an organization epitomize destructive behavior more than the Washington football team. So to me, the Woodchucks makes the most sense. That's my first choice. I've got 4. At number 2, the Washington Monuments. It's nice. It's clever. It pays tribute to the most famous monument and monuments in the United States. You're in the capital of the country, Washington, D.C. So it makes sense to pay homage and reverence to the capital, to the city, to one of the actual structures that embodies the United States, the monuments. You kind of keep with that motif, not to mention when you think about the other professional sports in the district capital, you've got the Washington Capitals, you've got the Washington Nationals. So Washington Monuments. You're staying along with that theme. You're keeping with that motif. I think it makes a lot of sense. And that would be a good option at number 2. At number 3, and this is why I mentioned maybe a wild hog, but I'm going with a wild turkey. The Washington Wild Turkeys. Now, I know you guys are going to scoff at this. I understand it. But think about this for a second. D.C., Washington, D.C. is actually home to a lot of wild turkeys. And when you think about Washington, D.C., you think about the capital of the United States. There isn't a holiday outside of July 4th that rings more true to Americans than Thanksgiving. And what do you have on Thanksgiving? You have turkey. And the problem is right now, the Washington football team, they don't have a legitimate sponsor. Obviously, FedEx removed itself from being a sponsor of the Washington football team. So you have a vacancy. Who can fill that? Wild Turkey Bourbon. That's your sponsor right there. They'll pay a lot of money. Wild Turkey Bourbon will be the new sponsor of the Washington football team, and you're going to have a rallying cry. You've got a great image. You can bring a wild turkey to the games to be the mascot, to run onto the field. You can brand it extremely well. That's what I would go with at number 3. At number 4, most people probably won't know who this type of livestock is, but I'm going with the Washington Kangles. So part of this is inspired out of a recent kind of documentary piece that I saw on a credible website, and it's actually very interesting. The Kangles are the most vicious dog right now on the planet. At least they look like the most vicious dog to me. They've got 700 pounds of their bite pounds per square inch. They wear a spiked collar. This is a type of guardian dog that specifically serves to protect livestock. They originate out of Turkey. So you're talking about a type of dog that actually goes out. It's fearless. It's unfazed. It hunts in packs, and it serves to protect. It'll go after tigers, wolves, bears, you name it. They're absolutely fearless. They're large. They're powerful. They're heavy burden. They're heavy-boned dogs. I kind of like the Kangles at number 4. Again, these are just my thoughts. Truthfully, I think a couple of these could work. I think they're a little bit better than the ones that they've already come up with, but we'll see what they ultimately decide to go with. So those are my suggestions. Take it as you will. Okay. Final topic before my Malkin's moments. So shifting to the tennis world, because the Australian Open, which is the first Grand Slam of the calendar year, is approaching. It's approaching, I believe, on January 17th, so in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And there was a lot of skepticism and speculation as far as Novak Djokovic and his vaccination status, whether or not he'd be eligible to play in this year's Australian Open, because we know about Australia's mask mandate. We know about their COVID restrictions, how stringent they are. And so that was the question. And apparently that question's been answered, because the world number one, Novak Djokovic, apparently received a medical exemption from Australia's tennis board to qualify for this year's 2022 Australian Open. So apparently initially the organizers of the Australian Open stipulated that all players must be vaccinated. That was what they came out and said. The Australian Open tournament director, Craig Tilley, on Wednesday said that 26 players or support staff had applied for anonymous medical exemptions. Most of them were not granted. And he made the claim that Djokovic was treated no differently than anyone else. That's what the tournament director said. The prime minister, or the deputy premier of Victoria, of the Victoria state, because obviously Australia is broken up into different states, and Melbourne, which is where the Grand Slam is played, falls under the state of Victoria. So their premier deputy, James Merlino, last month said that he insisted the medical exemptions would not be a quote-unquote loophole for privileged tennis players, end quote. And Jala Pulford, the state's acting minister for sports, on Wednesday said, quote, that no one is or will be receiving special treatment because of who they are or what they have achieved professionally. So that's what they came out and said. So let me break this down for people. Every organization, every corporation, every branch of government, they have a PR team. You have a press secretary to avert crisis, to mitigate backlash, among other purposes as well. So that's their job, is to spin titles, spin headlines, spin news, and present it in a way that makes sense for the public to digest, that they can buy, that they can believe. And so if all this is true, for the sake of starting my rant, if this is all true, then it's very valid. They claim that Novak Djokovic underwent a robust, thorough medical review process. So if that's the case, yeah, all these statements that have been made by the tournament director and the deputy and the sports minister, those all seem valid. Those all seem legitimate. It's one thing to beguile. It's one thing to unintentionally be deceitful. It's another thing to outright fabricate and to outright lie to people's faces and to the public's. And that's what's going on right here. Because the truth of the matter is, there is no reason why the entire country of Australia should be modifying its vaccination rules for one guy. That's what they came out and essentially that's what they did. They acquiesced to cater to Novak Djokovic's individual circumstance. That's what they did. And in fact, what they revealed is the most important thing behind all of this, which is what all these organizations, what all these corporations, what all these branches of government, less so for branches of government, but mainly for these organizations and corporations, what they all have in common. And that is the bottom line: making money, making revenue. They know good and damn well that if Novak Djokovic isn't there, they're going to lose a significant amount of fandom, a significant amount of money. The fact that Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Serena Williams are all not participating this year's Australian Open further highlights that, further accentuates that. The U.S. Open was about to endure a similar problem, and face a similar reality. Djokovic ended up playing in that tournament. But they understand that Novak Djokovic is probably the sport's biggest, if not one of the biggest draws to the sport. He's tied for the most Grand Slams ever by a tennis player with 20. He's won the Australian Open 9 times, which is the most all time for any tennis player. He's won the tournament 3 consecutive years. They wanted Novak Djokovic there, is the bottom line. And first of all, for me, I think it's a bit appalling. I think it's a bit shameful that, again, the fact that Australia had enforced such punitive measures to all its citizens for the last year and a half. When you think about Australia, they've implemented one of the most stringent quarantine lockdowns, one of the harshest travel restrictions anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. So this isn't about due process. This is about revenue. And again, Novak Djokovic has been publicly outspoken about being against the vaccine. He's always been kind of coy about and doesn't really reveal his vaccination status. He's always declined to do it. And for me, I just think that this is extremely disappointing. This is extremely shameful that the entire country is accommodating one individual. I understand how important that individual is to the sport, but when you look at Djokovic's track record when it comes to COVID, at the height of COVID back in June of 2020, he hosted an Adria Tour tournament, which ended up being an ill-fated tournament. It had good intentions behind it. It was supposed to be a charity event, but there weren't social distance guidelines. Players were hugging, were sweating around one another. It was just a COVID infestation, a huge COVID spreader. He ended up contracting COVID. And here's the interesting thing about the fact that he contracted COVID is the Australian Open has said, here are the legitimate reasons for exemption, to receive a medical exemption. It's if you have an acute major medical condition, a serious adverse reaction to the previous dose of a COVID vaccine, or there's evidence that the COVID-19 infection and those antibodies are within your body, that are in your body, have been in your body within the last 6 months. Well, this tournament that he hosted was over a year and a half ago. So clearly it's not in his body anymore. In fact, they're close members of his team that have come out and said to the Serbian newspaper months ago that they are about 99% sure that he's not going to be playing in this year's U.S. Open, implying that he probably didn't meet the vaccination requirements. So, Tennis Australia, again, had enacted a strict quarantine, a strict directive regarding a vaccination status and a vaccination requirement. And he's clearly not needing to be accounted for. And again, selfishly, as a tennis fan, am I happy that Novak Djokovic is in the tournament? Yes. Am I going to watch more of the tournament now because he's playing? Yes, I acknowledge all of the above. He is arguably the greatest tennis player to have ever played. And that's coming from someone who's always been a big Federer guy. I have a ton of appreciation for Novak Djokovic. I think that he is an incredible, incredible talent, and he has some good intentions. I do believe that. But that doesn't negate the fact that he should be absolved of rebuke and condemnation, not only him, but the Australian Open itself. Because basically what they just said, again, is that they're caving to the pressure. They are catering to one specific guy. They are deliberately going against what their country's position has been on the COVID vaccine. And that's something to me that is personally extremely, extremely disappointing. Okay. Final topic, my Malkin's moments. I have some great Malkin's moments for you. I realize I just threw one of these down. Let's pick this back up. So, sticking with tennis, my first Malkin's moments, they're a pair of star athletes that just got married, tennis star Sloane Stephens and American soccer star Josie Altidore apparently just got married on New Year's Day. congratulations to them. Sloane Stephens obviously has won a Grand Slam. Josie Altidore has been a prominent part of the U.S. men's national soccer team for the longest time. He hasn't played with them over the last couple of years, isn't on this edition of the team, but he's been an instrumental part. So congratulations to the two of them. In college football, so Alabama, number 1 seed in the college football playoff. They beat the 4 seed Cincinnati Bearcats. And for Nick Saban and Alabama, it was their 6th time reaching the college football playoff national championship game, which obviously is the most in the college football playoff era. After that 27-6 win, Brian Robinson rushed for 204 yards, which is the 3rd most rushing yards in a college football playoff game in the history of the college football playoff. The only guy that has rushed for more, Ezekiel Elliott, did it twice in 2014, rushed for 230 yards, funny enough, against Alabama in the semifinal, and rushed for 246 yards against Oregon in the national championship game to win Ohio State a national championship. Again, that was the first year of the college football playoff, but Brian Robinson, 204 yards, incredible performance. Sticking with the Tide, Bryce Young broke Tua Tagovailoa's record for the most touchdowns passed in a single season. Right now, he's got the most passing touchdowns in a single season in Alabama history. He's thrown 46 so far. It's incredible. Just 5 interceptions to go along with the 46 touchdowns, over 4,500 passing yards, completing 67.5% of his passes in just 14 games. He obviously won the Heisman. He's won numerous awards this year, along with AP, College Athlete of the Year. He's been incredible, and he's pacing the Tide right now. They got one more big showdown against SEC foe Georgia in the national championship game. So big shout out to those two guys. Sticking with college football, and speaking of Ohio State, that Rose Bowl was unbelievable. 48-45 win over the Utah Utes at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Was an incredible game. And 2 guys in particular for Ohio State just had magical performances. First of all, the quarterback, C.J. Stroud, who I used to cover in high school, played at Rancho Cucamonga High School in Southern California. So it was really cool to see him play on the biggest stage. It's been cool to watch him play for the Buckeyes this entire season. He was 37 of 46 for 573 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, just 1 interception, 70 on the game. It was incredible. On the season, over 4,400 passing yards, 44 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but get this, 72% completion percentage on the season. He's been absolutely sensational. And his wide receiver and his running mate, Jackson Smith-Njigba, was maybe even better than Stroud was, and that's saying a lot given his position. He had 347 receiving yards in the Rose Bowl, 3 touchdowns, 16 targets, 15 receptions. It was a Rose Bowl record for the most receiving yards. It was one of the top performances ever by a wide receiver in a college football game. He led the team in receiving yards this year with over 1,609 touchdowns. He just had a fantastic game, and he's just a sophomore. This kid's coming up. He's still going to be around for at least another year. He and C.J. Stroud already have that connection, that chemistry, and a big-time shout-out to him. Shout-out to Jaylen Brown scoring a career-high 50 points in an comeback overtime win versus the Orlando Magic. He became the 7th Celtic to ever score 50-plus points in a game. Speaking of 50-plus points, Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks scored a career-high 56 points, 14 assists in a 136-131 loss, unfortunately, to the Portland Trailblazers. Young became the first player with a 50-plus point, 14-assist game since James Harden with the Houston Rockets did it in 2016. He also scored and assisted on 86 points He scored or assisted on 86 points. That's nearly 66% of the points that they scored, which ties for the most in a game in his career and the third most by anyone in the past 25 seasons. As you can guess, James Harden is the only other guy that has done that. All right, a couple more. Stick with me. Couple more. Anthony Simons, the Portland Trailblazers guard, in that game against the Hawks, scored a career-high 43 points on 9 three-pointers, which was the most by any Portland Trailblazer this year. He had, unfortunately, just lost his grandfather a couple days prior, and he dedicated that performance in that game to him. And it was a special moment, the fact that he could come out and play like that. Anthony Simons has showed a lot of promise throughout his career. It's just been stringing together some consistency, which has been the issue. But that was a tremendous performance for him. The Atlanta Falcons tight end Kyle Pitts, the 4th overall pick in last year's NFL draft, which, by the way, is the highest that a tight end has ever been drafted in NFL history. He's the first rookie tight end to reach 1,000+ receiving yards in a season in 60 years. He achieved that milestone, obviously, unfortunately, in the 25-15 loss to the Buffalo Bills. But he became the Atlanta Falcons' all-time leading rookie receiver, breaking a record that was held for a decade by Julio Jones. And he had accumulated over 1,020 yards receiving in the first half, which put him 58 yards shy of Mike Ditka's rookie tight end and receiving mark of 1,076 yards set in 1961. Pitts became the second tight end in NFL history to eclipse 1,000 yards. And the reality is they still have one more game. And it's entirely plausible and likely that he would pass Mike Ditka's record. And last week against Detroit, he passed Tony Gonzalez for the most single-season receiving yards in Falcons history from a tight end last month. He became the first rookie Pro Bowl tight end since Jeremy Shockey in 2002. Kyle Pitts I drafted in my fantasy football league as my tight end, and he hasn't been getting the shine that he rightfully deserves because Matt Ryan hasn't been playing at his best. But Kyle Pitts is a special talent, a once in a decade, once in perhaps a generational type of talent. He's having a tremendous year. Final two Malkin's moments. Tyson Fury, there's a photo. Tyson Fury's final punch to complete the epic trilogy against Deontay Wilder won the 2021 Knockout of the Year award. He knocked him out in the 11th round. It was an incredible, just epic fight. All three of them were really good. So Tyson Fury won that award. And finally, Mike Tomlin became the first head coach in NFL history to never have a losing record in each of his first 15 seasons in the league. The guy just finds a way to bring out the best out of his teammates, to maintain consistency, and that's something that is extremely hard to do. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter, Jonah Malkin, or at morning_Joe_JMalk97 on Instagram, and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. Thank you so much, and as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.